thank you. So before we begin, do you have any questions?
Mm-mm.
Okay, then let's get started.
Okay.
So first, I'd like to ask some demographic questions. So first is, I'd like to know your age range
I'm
from...
45.
Okay, thank you very much. And what is your gender identity?
Female.
Okay. And what is your level of education?
I have a PsyD in clinical psych.
PsyD.
It's like a PhD, but more practice oriented.
Oh, okay. I see. So what is your, let's say, major? Is there any major?
Clinical psychology.
Clinical psychology. Okay. PsyD. How do you spell that?
PSY, capital D.
PSY.
It's a doctorate.
Okay. I didn't know that. I will look it up. Okay. Thank you very much.
Mhm.
And then I'd like to know about your hearing related demographic things. What is the identification of deafness?
It depends on who I'm speaking with.
Mm-hmm.
I either use lowercase d deaf or hard of hearing. It's been a while since I've been tested because I can't afford hearing aids. So I stopped going regularly to the audiologist. The last time was about 8 years ago. And at that time I could hear about 25 to 30% of normal hearing. So my guess is it's a little bit less than that now.
I see. Thank you very much. Okay, so yeah, lowercase d, deaf or hard of hearing, depending on the situation.
Right, because some people view deaf as a binary all or nothing experience. And so if I'm talking to a clerk in a store, for instance, I will often just say I'm hard of hearing. Because if I say that I'm fully deaf and then I turn and I speak to one of my family members, I get a weird look.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. Yes. And is that both side?
It's neurosensory or sensory neural rather. So it's not a mechanical ear thing, it's a brain thing.
I see. Okay. Is there any, I don't know, how to say, the frequency range you had to hear?
I hear about the lowest that I can hear is voice range. Human voice. So like I've been to, say, Niagara Falls and I can't hear it at all. I can only feel it.
Okay.
But higher pitches I hear much more loudly than average. So fluorescent lights or the old style tube televisions and computer monitors or dog whistles. Those are very loud and uncomfortable for me.
Oh, I see. When did you become deaf or hard of hearing?
Sometime between the ages of 5 and 16. It's not really clear.
Oh, okay.
So when I was an infant, I had very high fever, and they tested my hearing regularly from infancy to age 5. And they said at that time that I had a slight hearing loss on the left side, but that was it. And so at age 5, I stopped going. And then at age 16, my mother noticed that I was listening to the TV. What she said was really loud, and I was just about to turn it up even louder. And so that's when I got tested again. And at that point, I was around, I could hear about 75% of normal. And it's just sort of over the past 30 years has sort of steadily declined.
I see. Do you use hearing aids?
I don't.
Have you used?
I have used them. I used them from about age 16 to 21. And in the US, private healthcare, health insurance only helps a little bit until you're 19.
Oh, okay.
And then it doesn't seem to think that people over age 19 need to hear. And they're very expensive. And so then depending on what state you live in, there are some states with public programs that will help you pay. So for a while, I lived in New Hampshire, and they would pay for one hearing aid if you bought the other.
Hmm.
And it was all so it was hard, it was all it felt like so many walls and so many barriers to deal with, and I could function pretty well through lip reading.
Hmm.
And I use I can hear, it just I have to have the volume at 11, at 100% at all times. And so I just decided, I'm tired of fighting the government just to be able to function. And so I stopped watching television and started using earbuds for everything.
I see. I hope that the recent policy change of over the counter hearing aid would
I
help.
don't know that I will change things myself the older that I get, but if any of my children were to develop hearing loss, I would fight harder for them.
I see. How did you develop your skill of lip reading?
I didn't know that I did. But it was, around 16, one of the first audiologists I saw said, which was a terrible thing and worded very poorly, that I should go learn sign language immediately so that I wasn't left without a language. And nobody learns well under that sort of threat, that feeling of
Mm,
not a threat of personal harm, but a threat of loss like that.
mm,
That's not a great learning environment. But I tried, and I can sign very basically, but I also learned at that time that I was unconsciously compensating in a lot of ways, sitting at the front of the classroom, making sure people were facing me when they spoke. And that's when you start paying attention and realizing I can't hear you if you're not looking at me.
mm.
Things like that. So it wasn't I wasn't taught to lip read, and I didn't study how.
I see. I see. Thank you very much. Okay, then I'd like to start the questions related to audio engineering.
Sure.
So first, could you tell me your audio engineering career? Well, I'm sure you are working in the podcasting field.
What do you mean by carrier?
Like how did you get started audio engineering or podcasting?
So I broke my back in 2014 and have been on full disability since then for that. And I spent the first 4 years moping and feeling sorry for myself. And at the beginning of 2018, I missed working. I missed feeling productive and competent in the world, and having a role that wasn't solely mom or partner, that sort of thing. And so I thought, well, I listen to a lot of podcasts.
Mm.
I'll start one. And I thought it would be 5 or 10 episodes. Mostly, a lot of the podcasts I listened to were either history or true crime, because that was what my work was focused on. I specifically, I'm a clinical psychologist by trade, but I focused on forensic psychology and assessment. And so I worked in prisons, and I focused on assessment. And I kept hearing people ask questions that I knew the answer to.
Hmm.
What does it mean to be not guilty by reason of insanity? Or why is this clearly crazy person found guilty and this clearly sane person placed in a hospital, that kind of thing. And I understood the answers. Like, the answers were pretty clear to me because I'd made those decisions. I had worked in that field. So I thought I'd start. And so that's what the germination of the podcast was. After 6 months or so, I decided I didn't want to only do true crime, that what I was enjoying was feeling functional again and having a connection with the outside world again, and just feeling smart again after spending a lot of time feeling isolated and I have 4 children, so I was dealing with a lot of just that mommy role, and
Mm.
the ability to talk to other adults about things that interested me, and so I branched out, and so now my show is a general society and podcast, interview style, conversation style show, and I am currently editing episode number 448, so it has gone beyond the 5 to 10 that I kind of expected.
I see, I see. Yeah, I was just listening the episode 447, I think the latest one. I haven't
Mhm.
finished it yet, but it sounds very interesting. So, okay, then how do you consider your podcasting, do you do podcasting as professional or hobby or
I mean, it is professional. It pays for itself. I tell people that I do full-time work for part-time pay.
okay.
Basically, I only do the only reason it's monetized at all is so that it pays for itself because I don't want my hobby to be a drain on the family finances because Social Security checks from the government are not all that. I mean, it's reliable, but they're not all that generous. And so we lean on that. And I didn't want to be more of a burden on the family just because I wanted a hobby.
I see. How did you learn podcasting or audio engineering for podcasting?
It it sort of comes stepwise. I think like anything, nobody's born knowing how to edit. And so for me, this was, early 2018. YouTube didn't have captions on a lot of things, so I couldn't just watch videos, but I don't learn especially well that way anyway. I learn better through reading. So there was some of that. I asked existing podcasters a lot of questions, and I just made a lot of mistakes early on. And it takes you a little while to sort of find your voice, both literally and figuratively. And so at the time, Zoom wasn't really a thing. It was something that businesses used within business settings.
Yeah.
And so I don't even know if it exists anymore, but it was a recording program called Uber Conference, which is like Skype, sort of, but audio only. I believe now it has video, and now I believe it's a subscription service, but I've moved over to Zoom because Zoom has better video. So I can read lips and I can see better. Uber Conference tended to glitch out a little bit, but so the reason that Uber Conference matters is that the upside of it and the downside is that it puts both voices on the same track. And so there's less you can do with the editing. If you and I were to speak at the same time and overlap, tough. That's just there. And so with my early episodes, you can hear that I couldn't, but it's fine. It is what it is. So I learned little bits at a time. I learned to edit visually, and that is how I do. I don't listen until I published, pretty much, because I've learned a lot of little tricks on how to gauge volume levels. Gain, the gain is the term for incoming sound, and volume is the term for what people hear. And I've learned how to figure those out by reading the numbers on my DAW, my digital audio workstation, which I use Audacity because at the time that's all that was available. And I am both stubborn and stuck in my ways in certain things. And so I could learn other programs, but I know how to use Audacity really well by now. So I've stuck with that.
I see, I see. Yeah, I'd love to know how you use Audacity and how you edit visually, as you said. Would you mind sharing your screen and show me the Audacity view and kind of.
Yeah, no, that's no problem. I have an episode set up that I'm working on right now, number 448 right now. And so what it starts with is before the editing part, during the recording part, I tell Zoom I switched over to Zoom at the start of the pandemic. So in early to mid 2020, and because it got better, and a lot more people had it. It used to be that you would ask someone, do you have Zoom? And about half the people I talked to would be like, I've never heard of that before. And so you needed something that any user, any guest would be familiar with. But as time
Right.
goes on, everybody has Zoom. So great,
Yeah.
that's much easier. And so I've learned to tell Zoom, on the control side, to put each voice on separate tracks. So it records them separately. And you give it a couple of seconds at the beginning and a couple of seconds at the end of the conversation itself to give a little bit of a buffer that helps line the tracks up. So I do most of my episodes. I do record on my computer as a backup, but I use most of the audio I use is through Zoom, because for the most part, the Zoom audio is good enough. Until someone complains, I'm not going to change it. And so what I do is I start every recording with a blank piece of paper in front of me. They're conversations. They're not interviews. I don't have talking points.
Okay.
And I have a series of questions that I ask everybody, housekeeping kinds of things. And then when we get going, I write down, their start time when they introduce themselves. I write down if we overtalk. And at the time, I write down either remove me or remove them. Like I said, I have 4 children, and so if I hear somebody walking around, or more accurately, if I see it, I can recognize what it looks like when the dishwasher turns on, or what it looks like when someone's walking around upstairs. I'll write down that time, and so when I'm done, I have a list of timestamps for things, and that speeds up the editing a lot, by a whole lot. And
I'm sorry to interrupt. So you are making that list of timestamps while you are doing conversation or interview. Okay.
Yep. And and I also write down at the time, if they make a reference to another podcast or something that they want me to link to, ideas for the title of the episode, that kind, sort of whatever comes to mind. But mostly I'm focusing on the timestamps. And I try to write down what it is that I'll be looking for. And when we're all done, Zoom converts the file, and then I convert it again, because Zoom converts it to a .m4a file type, which Audacity doesn't work well with. So I use an online file converter and change them to MP3s, and then download them into Audacity. And that's when I do the editing. So I'll download, and I'll have 2 separate files. I'll have mine and the other person's, and they'll be the same length. Right. And
I see.
So I copy, because I used to get 2 separate files, and then there's a while of shifting them around until they align. That's the reason that I use Zoom, is because they're just nicely aligned, and the audio is fine. So there's that.
I see. It's very interesting.
Okay, so let me hit share screen. All right.
Thank
So
you.
you're able to see
Yes,
Audacity?
I can see it. Yes.
Okay. I have to make it a little bit smaller so I can see the controls at the top. So the top, you'll see here, I've already, this is my speech and my guest's speech, and mine always goes on the top, theirs always goes on the bottom, and that just makes it easier for me to find what I'm looking for.
Okay.
So this particular recording is 43 minutes long. I'm pointing like you can tell. 43 down here at the very bottom. It says start and length of selection. It's 43 43 minutes long. And so up at the top is my speech, and down at the bottom is the other person's speech. And so I chose, for this editing, I chose one that's pretty clean. That there weren't a lot of times. I've had times where someone just, like, they'll come on with a cold, for instance, and the answer is please reschedule if you have a cold, because it takes so much more time to edit, like, for anyone, but extra if I'm deaf, because I'm writing down sniffles every few seconds, you know.
I see.
But this one's pretty clean, and so I only really had 3 spots on this one. I have the ending of the recording. There's a noise that happened on my side, and then I have the start of it. So I go to the end, and it's hard. The Zoom controls are blocking me a little bit. So this is I choose for this part, ultimately, for the whole episode, I will also pull in music that I commissioned. I record like a little monologue of my own as an introduction, and a second little monologue as an exit. Those I do after I'm all done. So what we're looking at here is just the conversation itself, the main body of the episode.
Okay.
And so because I do an intro and an outro on my own, I prefer my guest to be the first and last speaker for the conversation itself, just sort of reminding people of who it is they're listening to. So in this case, you know, my voice would be on the top if it was me speaking, but it's my guest. And so I'm going to go through, and this is we wait a few seconds when we're done to let the tracks align, and because I find if I hit stop too soon, sometimes it cuts off their last word, or they'll think of something else they want to say and I've lost it already. And so I go through, and I just, as I just did, I just sort of eyeball like close to their last word, but I don't want to clip it off. And I hit delete. And then later I use numbers rather than audio I will mix and render both tracks to the same. Once we'll get there, and then I add music in the outro, and I have a 3-second pause that I will add right here after the conversation, and then at the 1.5 second mark, I write that timestamp down as well. That's where commercials will be inserted, and that's how I make sure a commercial does not interrupt the conversation itself in some way. So that's just finding the end of where we spoke. And then when you use timestamps to edit, I learned early on the easiest thing to do is edit backwards. So start with the latest timestamp and work toward the front, and that way they stay even. So if I did it the other way, if I went through, so in this case, there was a noise here at the 34-minute mark, and my guest started speaking at the 13-second mark. If I were to go to the 13-second mark, if I were to start at the beginning, now I've skewed all of my timestamps by 13 seconds right away. I don't want to do that. So
I see.
You start at the end and work forward, and it cuts a lot of time down. And it's things like that just you learn by doing. You learn by screwing it up, and then at one point you realize, oh, this is a lot easier. Let's do it this way. So as I said, at the 34-minute mark, there's a noise that happened on my end. And I only know about it because when I was sitting here, I have Audacity running, and I could see a noise appear while my guest was speaking that I didn't make or that I didn't want. And so that's here, at the 34-minute mark right there, that where I'm highlighting on the top, that something fell upstairs at my house, which is a pretty common occurrence in a house with 4 kids. And so I've learned, Control L is the shortcut on Audacity to get rid of that, whatever it is. And then I didn't have any other edits that I'm going to do to this one. And so I scroll all the way back to the beginning. So it's me speaking at the top here. And this is me telling my guest, when you're ready, please tell people who you are and what you do. And then we will play from there. And my guest says, okay. And this one is a male guest, and he started speaking here at the 14-second mark. And so I tell it clip until it's split, and just highlight the whole thing and delete. And now I've got, that's all of the editing that has to happen.
I see. Wow.
And so it's all visual. And so then I don't know if you can hear the sound or not if I play it, but the next step is to figure out the volume levels, because I want myself and my guest to be approximately the same volume for listeners. You don't want to be listening to we've all listened to podcasts where the one person is screaming and the other person is whispering, and that's no good. So I sort of spot check a couple of places. So you can, if you look up here, are you able to hear him?
No, I can't.
Okay. All right. So, but you can see here, it goes up here between 12 and 6.
Yes.
So I can tell that's his volume. And I go to mine, and it's about the same. And so I know that my guest and I are at about the same audio level for this one.
In this case, do you pay attention to the, purple line or that green moving?
The purple one is the highest it goes. The green is the
What's actually
dynamic,
happening.
from second to second. So what I do is I check several different spots, and compare it in several places. Ultimately, what I will do, and I won't take your time to do so, but ultimately what I will do is then I go into effects and I tell it amplify, and I check to make sure how much can I amplify my sound. And this says 6.451 is what I could amplify. And I hit cancel. I don't do it right away, because then I highlight his and I do the same thing. And his says 5.351. So that means that his voice is a little bit louder than mine. That there's a little bit more space to amplify mine than his. And so I'll probably end up amplifying all of them. I'll probably average it to the 6, because one was 5.5, one was 6.5. So I'll probably average it to 6 and be like, okay, we're close enough. I don't make myself crazy by perfectionism, because I'm deaf. And so if somebody has a problem with imperfect sound from a deaf podcaster, they have problems that I can't begin to address. And so what the process is that once I do that, once I amplify everything to the level that I want it to be at, I have, it's called sync lock. It keeps the tracks aligned, so that if you delete a spot, it deletes both tracks, so they remain the same length, the same amount of time. I remove that. I select everything, select all, and I tell it tracks, mix, and render to new track. You don't really have to do that. I've seen podcasters who leave everything on a separate track, every speaker, all the music, everything. That's fine. It's easier for me to sort of read and understand what I'm looking at if I do it that way. And so I would tell it mix and render to new track. Then this is what my music looks like. And so the music runs, this is sort of, the music is maximum volume. And so I almost always have to take it down by a couple of points. And so that's where you go to amplify. So it says amplify, you know, and this is really just a guess. Is I copy. This is the I have opening music, I have transitional music, and I have closing music, and I copy and paste it into the other file, and then you just sort of eyeball it because you want the music slightly louder than the speech, but not so much louder that it blows out someone's eardrums just trying to listen to a podcast, just trying to get to that point. So you do that. I have every one of my episodes has a disclaimer. So in this case, this is what my disclaimer looks like. That's probably going to need to be nudged either louder or quieter, depending on the speaker. I don't know. I also add I have monetized ads for every episode. That's automatic through my host, which is Spreaker. But I also manually include a promo, an ad for another podcaster, which is not paid. It's just sort of being a good neighbor, helping get the word out to other shows. And those are all over the place in terms of volume. That some of them are really, really quiet, really tiny waveforms. Others are just racked as loud as they can go. And so this one looks sort of mid-range. I suspect I'll probably have to increase it a little bit. So you sort of do it all piecemeal. And then I go through, I copy and paste all of the different pieces into one file. And for reasons of aesthetics, really nothing else, it seems like 1.5 seconds feels like the right pause time between the promo and the disclaimer, and between the disclaimer and the opening music, and that sort of thing. So that's where I use this down at the bottom. Is you put this. So let's say I wanted this to start let's say I wanted this to start at 1.5 seconds. You can manually move it, or I'll type it in.
I see.
Down there. So it's a lot of steps, but I feel like it's a lot of steps for anybody anyway. It's just that being hard of hearing, I've had to figure out how to do these steps visually and using the actual number count rather than I can't do. I know that there are podcasters who can rely on, I'm just gonna earball it. Like, I don't know the right word for, I'm just gonna guess. I'm gonna kind of play around with it. I can't do that. I have to use numbers, and I have to use that 1.5 seconds for everything all of the time, because I can't necessarily tell if music is fading out. I don't want to cut off somebody's promo, somebody else's ad, just because I can't hear it. So instead of guessing how long it is, because sometimes they are, you'll get some here, like you can see a little bit on this if I pull it larger. So that's her speech, and you can see that there's a little bit of empty space, but it's really just a little bit. It's not a long time. It's from the end of her last word to the end of the recording is 0.3 seconds. So I'm just going to leave that there. But there are some where there's a full 5-10 seconds, and then I have to, highlight that and hit play and see if anything shows up. And what I saw here is that it shows up as a very slight noise at the very beginning of the selection.
Mhm.
So, but I'm going to leave it because it might be an S. It might be, a
Mm.
sibilant sound that you don't notice you hear, but you'll notice it chop off if I cut it.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I have to play around with that sometimes for some people's promos.
Mm, 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 mm.
So that's as close as I can come to the auditory version of eyeballing things, but for the most part, it's using numbers in visual, and I will, do exactly what I'm doing here is sort of magnify, heighten the waveforms at times, especially for the editing. For one, there's one. So this one that I just showed you, there were 5 total. Four total things, of the start time, the
Mm.
noise that happened here, the end time. There's another, and this other one is a professional podcaster. She
Mm.
should know better. I'm not going to call her out by name, but she should know better. There are a dozen or more times where she sniffles or we overtalk. That's going to take me a long time to edit, and that's going to be a case where I magnify in closely to really be able to see what I'm doing, and
I
I'll do
see.
that sometime when the kids are not home so that there's no background noise.
I see. Is it possible that I can see, could you show me that a part of the waveform?
Of hers?
Yeah, like the one you have to edit, like overlap.
No, I don't have it. I haven't downloaded. I haven't converted the
Okay.
file yet.
I see.
But it would, it would be the equivalent of, if this is more accurate. So this is only the guest.
Mhm.
So this is the one I just walked you through, that I actually just edited. This is only the guests, because they come down as separate tracks, and then I copy and paste this. So if every one of these, what they are, I know from checking and listening, every one of these is him saying something briefly. Or saying or yes or okay, and I leave all of the ums and uhs and okays in, both because I want my show to sound like a conversation. I don't want it to sound polished up. I want it to sound like normal people talking to each other, because that's the vibe of my show, and because I don't want to make myself insane. I stutter, especially if I am tired, if I am struggling to keep up. This particular guest was super smart, and he knows about things I don't know about. And so I was really, keeping up with him the best I could the whole time. And so there's definitely times where I'm starting the same sentence 3 times, and I'm just going to leave that in because that's who I am. And I think some of the reason people listen to my show is to hear me as much as to hear the guests. So part of what they want to hear is a flawed human being. They don't want to hear a perfect interviewer. But so if every one of these little lines was a sniffle, then instead I would have to zoom in on every one of them and highlight and mute it. And in this, you can see that there's a little bit of background noise too. And the reason that I know that is that this line here is not perfectly flat. I'm going to probably leave that because Zoom does a pretty good job of evening the two out. But I will choose, I'll highlight some point where both of us are supposed to be silent and play it, and see, it doesn't show up as anything. If you look at Audacity, there's nothing showing up here. So
Right.
There's clearly something going on, but it's not. If Audacity isn't sensitive to pick it up, I'm going to assume that listeners aren't
Right.
going to pick it up. So I'm just going to leave it.
I see. I'd like to know, so for you to tell something is a noise or some kind of quick response like or it's basically depending on the list of the timestamps you made.
Right.
I see. I was curious, what if you missed that, or have you ever missed the timestamps making a
I'm
list?
sure. I'm sure I have. Like, some conversations, this guy was so fast that I'm sure that I missed things. Because he was he's very smart, very sharp, and very fast in his speech. And I wrote down what I noticed at the time, which was primarily he would be speaking and I would see a noise pop up on mine. And that's all I got. Other times you have guests where you can't get them to put their pen down. And so they're talking to you, but they're doing this. And you can't remove the pen click from their track because it's overlapping their voice. You just have to leave it. And so that's what I'm saying is that my skill, what I bring, is not so much in audio editing. I think I would be more of a perfectionist if I could hear, but I cannot. So I had to give some real thought to, okay, what can I bring instead to the podcast space? And what I am good at, both because of who I am, but also more so because of my training. A forensic psychologist, my job would be to answer a question, depending on what the state asked. Is this person competent to stand trial, or what is their diagnosis? Things like that. And you learn ways to just roll with it. Because if I walk in and I'm very structured and very intense and very uptight, it can be hard. It's harder to form a working communication and bond with this person. And you're not bonding with them in the sense of like, I'm going to bring this murderer home for dinner. Like, that's not the goal. But the goal is to get them to talk with me openly and answer the question that the state has asked me, which I sometimes will tell the inmate or the patient or the client, depending on the circumstances. Sometimes I'll tell them what the question is. Other times I won't tell them what it is that I'm trying to get answered. And so you just sort of build a rapport around it. And the easiest way to do that is to let them start. You ask some open-ended questions and you learn how they communicate and you roll with it rather than always taking control. There are some people that need you to take control of the conversation. There are other people where you just sit back. There was one woman I recorded with 6 or 8 months ago who had a story to tell, and she didn't feel that people were listening to her. And so when we, I did the housekeeping that I do with everybody. I describe my show and I give them a little background on what to expect, and I get their names and their pronouns and their social media and that kind of thing. And then I'm like, okay, so I'm going to hit record. I'll let you know once it is recording and we'll go from there. And I did, and she talked for the next 45 minutes and I didn't say a single word, because that's just what she desperately needed. And then at some point I was like, okay, I kind of need to inject myself into my own show. And she was slowing down. And so that's what I bring. That's what I have. Is I think being deaf for my entire adult life has forced me to learn facial cues and body language, and I'm paying close attention and I'm staying in the moment. One of the reasons I don't do structured interviews and I don't have talking points or an agenda is because when I do that, I find myself paying too much attention to the paper and worrying about, I have to remember to ask this and I better ask it in the right way or whatever. And if I start with a blank piece of paper and now I'm focused on here, I'm focused on what's happening between us as a conversation rather than worrying about okay, I'm going to check my little list off of things that I needed to ask. And as well, when I do that, I find it to be a much more genuine conversation, more sort of valid, and get a snapshot of this person that doesn't feel like they're in public relations mode. And it helps me listen. It helps me hear what they're saying rather than what their publicist has told them to say.
It's very interesting. The last people I interviewed, they do fiction podcasting. So the approach to the podcast itself and the approach to the audio engineering looks very different, which I didn't know. Yeah, thank you very much. It's very helpful to know how you do and how you
Sure.
approach your podcast.
Should I stop with the screen share? Are you good?
Yeah, yes, I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I'd like to know if you have any, or if you feel or find any challenges or annoying things because of your hearing situation when you do audio engineering.
I've had people tell me that there's no such thing as a deaf podcaster. This happens, so I've been doing it almost 5 years. And I would say twice a year, give or take. I've had people tell me it's not possible to be a deaf podcast. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting. Thanks for pointing that out to me. I've had people tell me I don't look deaf, which is a whole lot to unwrap there. Because I didn't realize deaf had a look. And I've had people tell me that deaf people can't listen to podcasts, and I sure do. So that's, there's a lot of like weird assumptions that people make. I have hired a transcriptionist. So I use Otter.ai to do like a first pass through to transcribe episodes. And then I have a hearing friend, I guess, who I pay to go through just the first couple of minutes of each. Like, I don't have the money, frankly, to fully transcribe 450 hours worth of audio. But the concept in my head, anyway, is that at least it's there as a start. And if anyone wants a more precisely transcribed episode, they can ask. But I don't want anyone to have to ask just because they want to be able to read along.
I see. Okay, so in that case, the annoying thing or challenge is more about the people's misunderstanding or some kind of bias rather than the audio engineering process itself.
I don't know anyone else who edits the way that I do. Because, like you said, like there's the other deaf podcasters that I know are primarily in the fiction space. There are upsides to that, to being in a scripted and fictional space, in the sense that you can redo things, and there's a heightened sense of control, and there's a little bit less pressure in the moment. I have been asked and have done. I've done one audiobook and have been asked to do some voice acting, and I will. But it terrifies me. It stresses me out very deeply because I can't hear myself. And so I don't know how to reproduce a voice or a tone. Do you know what I mean? Like I could maybe reproduce cadence. I could probably hear myself well enough if I played back to imitate a cadence or whatever. But because I rely on lip reading rather than hearing aids. I I very, very rarely hear accents. And that like anywhere in the world. I don't hear accents within the US. I don't hear international accents. I've had people tell me, oh, I have a such and such accent. I'll be like, okay, don't care. Like I get, because as long as the shape of your mouth is pretty much there, I don't know. I don't even know. And I tend to assume that it's me, that I'm just not quite hearing right, and it's no big deal, and we work better. And it's been interesting when I have had the opportunity to travel internationally. I found that I have an easier experience, even if let's say we're in a restaurant and our waiter, like I went to Paris a couple of years ago, more than a couple now, given the pandemic, and I had no problem understanding the wait staff in restaurants in Paris, even though obviously they all had a French accent, but they all spoke English and I could see their lips. And so we were fine. I struggle a lot with masks. Like I rarely leave the house now because I can't, but as long as I can see your face, I can understand what we're saying. So we're good there, but I can't hear accents, so I can't imitate them. And so I can't do voice acting that requires an accent.
I see.
And the audiobook that I did, I recorded the entire thing in 2.5 days because I didn't want to lose the sense of cadence and volume and setup that I had. I was afraid that if I spread it out over a couple of weeks, that one day I would be speaking too quickly and another day, so I've been told that I imitate people's accents if we talk long enough, and I don't realize I'm doing it.
Okay.
But I think it's just because I start to, I can hear enough that I think I start to do that a little bit, and I wanted it to be the same accent, the same voice all the way through. So it was deeply stressful is the story.
I see.
So it was more the process of recording and setting up, to silence background noise is another thing that I had a hearing friend come and help figure out the settings, the numbers to use to do a noise reduction so that I can, in the summertime when we have a dehumidifier and an air conditioner running elsewhere in the house, I can get rid of those sounds but not distort the voices too much. And I can't tell the difference one way or the other. Like I can tell the difference between, okay, there's noise happening here and there's not noise happening there, but I can't tell the difference between this has distorted the speech and this hasn't. So I've had to have hearing friends come and help me set that up. And then I had the numbers written down so that I always use the same settings.
I see. Actually, I wanted to ask 2 more questions, and one of that is about the hearing people's feedback. Like I wanted to ask, do you get hearing people's feedback or support for your work?
As far as, I just rolled over 1 million downloads. Insane, right? Like a couple of weeks ago. And so I'm doing okay. I'm doing pretty well. And that's, people are listening. And there's a lot of people who have no idea until I say, because I learned how to speak before I lost my hearing. And so I've had people tell me I don't sound deaf. And people, early on, I just would take it in. So my very earliest episodes, the music is definitely too loud. And I decided I'm not going to go back and edit all of them because I have other stuff I want to do instead. But early on, people would say your music is too loud. And so I took that feedback and I learned how to level out the music with the speech to make them match up closer to what I want. And so that's what I use hearing people for, is there that kind of feedback. And I've asked friends of mine who are audio engineers or who have good hearing to say, like, are you able to hear this? Is this clear? And I don't want a there, yes, it's wonderful, pat me on the head and tell me I'm pretty. I want people to tell me what I can do better. And so I'm sort of always learning new tricks and new ways to make the process work better.
I see. Thank you very much. The last question, sorry, it's almost time, but is it okay? It's about the technology. Is there any technology that you wish to have to make your audio engineering process more accessible or more better?
That's a hard question to answer because I've learned what I've learned on my own and have been doing it for 5 years. So I don't know that I would change much now. I know that I can't transcribe, and there's an irony to the fact that I used to work as a transcriptionist early in my adult life before my hearing got as bad as it is. I used to work as a transcriptionist, and so I know it's work. And so I've had friends offer to do it for free, and I'm like, absolutely not. Like, this is work. You need to be compensated, and so I had to wait to transcribe. And there are still a lot, about a third of my episodes are not transcribed yet because I haven't been able to get to afford it yet. So there, I'm learning new technologies to do things like that, to make things more accessible. I've learned, for instance, every episode when I release it on social media that, hey, if I'm going to offer and hope for transcripts that people don't have to ask for, because there's very little that makes me crazier and angrier than people who put their transcripts behind a paywall. It's common. It's a common thing for people to say, if you want a transcript of this episode, subscribe to our Patreon. And that's just punishing people for having a disability. Because it's not just deafness that gets in the way. Audio processing disorder can be an issue. There's lots of reasons why people may need a transcript. And putting it behind a paywall is just nasty. And so learning that technology is fine. Would I switch to a different DAW, for instance? Probably not. Because I've learned this one. I tried very, very hard in mid 2020. It's when everybody was home anyway. And so I think it wasn't a great time to learn because everyone was stressed out. But a former friend pressured me to try to learn Reaper instead of Audacity. It's a better program. It has more whatever. Okay, I'll try it because it has a free trial period. And I tried that. I tried hard, and I reached a point where I would just sit in my computer and cry because it was so stressful trying to relearn all of these things. I'm sure I have bad habits with editing, but those bad habits aren't hurting anybody else, and they're getting episodes out. And so I gave it like that free trial month, and then I realized, what am I doing? I hate this. This stop being fun. And podcasting was always meant to be more fun than stress for me. And so I uninstalled Reaper, and I haven't gone, but so Audacity is a real sort of bare bones program in a lot of ways. And there are there's a lot of stuff on here that I really don't need, but I haven't bothered to get rid of those other options or those plugins or that sort of thing, because whatever, I know what it is that I need, and I know what I don't, and I just sort of do my thing.
I see. Thank you very much. It was very helpful and very insightful, and I really enjoyed talking with you. Before closing, is there anything you want to add or you want to ask or anything?
I don't think so.
Okay, thank you very much. So, what I wanted to say. So, me and my advisor, we'd like to send you a Amazon gift card.
Okay.
To show our appreciation.
Sure.
But because it's kind of the gift card will be sent by my advisor. His name is Mark Cartwright.
Okay.
But as soon as he sent you the gift card, I will send you the confirmation email
Okay.
and it might be sometime next month if that's
That's
okay, because it's kind
That's
of
fine.
Christmas time.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And
That's fine.
also, I'm planning to write a paper.
Uh-huh.
And I hope I can keep you updated once it's published or.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. If you decide you want to come on the show and talk about your paper, let me know.
Thank you very much. It's kind of, I don't feel pressure, but first of all, I want to listen to your podcast episode. Yes. Thank you very much. for
Not
your offer.
pressuring, but the option is there if you want some. I'll talk to anybody. It's just fun. It's just fun to make connections. So, all right, I will let you go. Thank you so much for your time,
Yeah, thank you very much for your time again.
and we'll be in touch.
Yes. Please have a great holidays. Happy Christmas.
Thanks.
Happy New Year. Bye.
Bye.